Okay, hello. Today is the 11th of June, 2022, and we'll present the work of this important German architect, Josef Paul Kleihues, who died in 2004 and was born in 1933. So let's read a little bit about him. Josef Paul Kleihues was born on this day, and that's the reason we talk about him today, on the 11th of June, 1933, and died in August 2004 in Berlin. Was a German architect, most notable for his decades-long contributions to the critical reconstruction of Berlin. His design approach has been described as poetical rationalist. Poetic rationalism, what could this be? Similar words had been used like lyrical functionalism. He was indeed rather functionalist and a rationalist, but with a twist, so to speak. So there was always something else there, little change to the system, so to speak, which made the critics describe him as a poetic rationalist. I think any architect who deserves the name of being called an architect, a he or a she, in order to deserve this name, has to have some kind of a poetry in his or her projects, his or her buildings. And what could that mean? In what way architecture can be poetic? Well, first we should ask ourselves, what is poetry after all? What does it mean to live poetically under the sky or poetically on the earth? What does that mean? Perhaps it means to allow emotions to emerge and manifest themselves. In essence, I think it's about imagination, about emotions, about the soul. In other words, a rationalist architecture that is also poetical is an architecture which is not born exclusively from the brain. It's not just the result of calculations, but is also the result of an emotional involvement of the author, of the architect, with whatever is to be done, with whatever is to be built. And I think it's very, very important indeed not to neglect the poetical side of architecture. And again, Frank Lloyd Wright was right. This time he was right when he said a great architect is a great poet. Yes, even if he or she doesn't write poetry with words, but he or she writes poetry with materials, with wood, with steel, with glass, with stone, with bricks, and so on. So let's see a little bit the works of this German architect, whom I had a chance to see live in a conference at Columbia University in New York many years ago. And I even wrote a reply to his lecture called Apropos of Josef Paul or Paul Kleihues lecture. Whoever is interested to receive it, please write to me and I will send it to you. So Professor Josef Paul Kleihues, indeed, he was a professor. He looked like a professor, he acted like a professor, and he built like a professor. But a professor with, who also had that poetic persona. And that poetic persona is what makes an architect a good architect. So he was German, so he was very rigorous, but he also searched for freedom. And in essence, poetry has to do with freedom. You cannot have poetry without freedom, although you can assume a very rigid formal construct or construction of your poem, be it architectural or linguistic, but in essence, you aspire towards poetry. And we are going to see particularly a building that he built in Berlin, which illustrates this, I think, rather explicitly. So Professor Josef Paul Kleihues Yeah, so let's start with this work. From 1969 to 1980, it was an early work by him. You remember, he died in 2004. It's a drawing, it's a project, but it says something about him, because it seems to be, rational, but also has, deviations. In a way, poetry has to do with being deviant. Poets usually are deviant. That's why perhaps God punishes them, or the devil, by giving them the shortest lifespan. Maybe you know, but poets live the shortest. They usually die young. Many poets. There are very rare poets who live, to old age, as opposed to architects who have an incredible longevity. At this very moment, there are very important architects who are over 90, many of them. And, poets, on the other hand, sometimes they die in their 20s or 30s. Very rarely you find a poet who lives to 90 or so. The building is interesting, though, even by the standards of today. It's a 50 years old, more than 50 years old building. It has glass, but it has also rhythmicity, and it has vertical pieces of glass. And then there are the solids, the little towers, if I can call them so, which maybe contain the staircases. It's not bad, it's not bad. Maybe it's not very unpredictable, but it's not a bad building. And even seen from this side, it almost looks like it could be some kind of a, palace, or culture palace, or the workers' palace. Well, it's not. It's some kind of an industrial building. You see, we see those vehicles in front of it. Maybe some kind of a delivery or storage, large space, or whatever. But it has dignity. It has nobility, even if the function is prosaic. From this image as well, this is not a building one could pass by without perhaps, a slight gesture of being interested in. It's quite large, as you can see. It's an industrial building. What is this? I don't know German, unfortunately. From 1975 to 1981, some kind of a centrum, which is a center, and it does look like a center, perhaps too much so. Fortunately, it has some beautiful small trees in front of it, which bring the necessary disorder of nature, if I am to call it so. But the building, I mean, even this part of the building is a complex. I think it's okay, it's rational, but it's not oppressively rational. And again, the participation of the ivy, the climbing, plant adds to the poetry. And also it adds, like this building, for example, I actually like it. It reminds me of the early works of Mies van der Rohe before he moved to the United States. And I think there is almost a certain romantic quality here at work. It's not a rigidly conceived work, and it's possible, yes, that Josef Paul Kleihues was inspired in a way by the early works of Mies van der Rohe, those that he built in bricks, using bricks. But even here, where he doesn't use brick so opulently, you look at the metal and glass part of the building, and I think it's done. It's not obsessively horizontal. I mean, in terms of the glass part, like the dogmatic horizontal glass band that the modernists promoted. Quite the opposite. It has verticality because of the mullions. And I think it's bad. It's a good example of a work which is rational, but not rigidly so. I actually like more his early works, like these. We are going to see also his later works, but these early works of Josef Paul Kleihues, I think they are good, and I think they stand the test of time. And I also think this is in part, at least, because of the participation of the masonry walls, the brick walls, which bring some warmth to the whole building. But even without them, the building, because of its emphasis on the rhythmical vertical parts, because of the mullions, of course, of the glass partitions, I think is pleasing visually. Now look here, again, this is a work that shows skill and shows a degree of freedom and a degree of even playfulness. Yes, with cubes, but there is still some kind of a playfulness. It's not very, very rigid. What is this? 1984, 1985. The Karl-Dreieck, Berlin. This is the building actually I was referring to when I mentioned earlier that I wrote an essay about him. So he built this between 1984 and 1995. And I remember when he lectured at Columbia University in New York, he did show this building, and he mentioned Josephine Baker, the explosive black dancer who took Europe by storm and who made even Le Corbusier and Adolf Loos kind of fall in love with her. When he made this piece above, which is actually moving, he made a reference to Josephine Baker, meaning he made references to a dancer, to dance, to the freedom of dance, to the beauty of dance. Now, it is a little bit big, it is, but it is his idiosyncratic and iconoclastic way of kind of opposing to the cubical, attributes of the building below, something that proclaims something else, a different spirit, the iconoclasm of poetry, the iconoclasm of freedom, the iconoclasm of flying, and of movement. So I guess he needed the mobile part to complement the static, the passivity of the building below. The building below is well built, as you can see. The structure is very well done, and even interestingly, to an extent, it's still a rationalist building. But the capricious thing at the top, and I don't know what its function is actually, is this one here. I imagine this company paid for it, or is rented for advertising. I don't know, but this capricious thing at the top is actually making the show, so to speak. Of course, architecture is not just a show, but we all like interesting buildings. We all like buildings that have something different, something even exceptional, hopefully. And this is what Professor Josef Paul Kleihues did in Berlin. The building is still gray. The building is still cubistic. It's cubical. It's rational. It's rationalist. But that thing at the top shows another side of Professor Josef Paul Kleihues. And, I guess, this is like, the feather on a hat, on a cap, on a hat. That feather has its meaning and its role. And perhaps we shouldn't forget, doing architecture, of that element, apparently superfluous. But there is a need for that. That's why, many hats, mainly in the past, but maybe in the present too, and maybe expensive hats, had a feather, sometimes an exotic feather attached to the hat. Why? What was the meaning of that feather? I think kind of like the meaning of this piece here at the top of this grayish cubistic building. The plan itself has, a deviation from Cartesianism or rectangularity. So it's still a kind of an interesting building, intriguing building. Despite the fact that, yes, it is grayish and, based on a grid, this part, and with a rationalistic structure, but the structure itself is very rigorously done. It's a fine structure, and it's not as simplistic as it could have been. This thing, yes, is a little bit big, actually, for my taste, but, it's not really about my taste. It's about, it is a curious thing, when you look at it. I mean, it's tall, several floors high, and I don't know what function it has besides rotating. I don't know, in the wind, it's mobile, but it creates the otherness that art is supposed to bring to life and to architecture itself. Now, the museum in Frankfurt am Main, the Archaeological Museum, from 1984 to 1988, and I think Josef Paul Kleihues was able to avoid trappings of postmodernism, but not so much in this building. Although he didn't make the mistakes that, for example, James Sterling did when he moved from a resolute modernity or modernism into a ludic but questionable postmodernism. Touches of postmodernism can be seen here too, because it was postmodernist looking nostalgically towards the past, and many architects had been affected by that nostalgia. I think that nostalgia is problematic today, although in essence, nostalgia is not necessarily a bad thing. It depends what we do with it. If we don't become trapped in an idealized past. Anyway, what is this? Gallery, Stadtische Gallery in 1986, 1989, and museum. He built this thing. The museum existed. The old museum existed. He built this thing. It's an octagon in plan. This building was not built by him. He just did some interventions inside and built that gallery or pavilion outside. This makes me think, of course, a little bit of, maybe more than a little bit of Aldo Rossi. But you see, he didn't mimic the old architecture. He still created something new, although, maybe not dramatically new, not dramatically different. Yet there is a difference between this building and this building for all to see. So there is a moving forward on the spiral of time. I guess he liked this kind of structure. And even this X, that appears on the elevations, like in the previous building, the X includes the diagonals, the two diagonals, and the diagonals are formal acts of, of rebellion in a way, formal rebellion. The inside is fine, it's clean, maybe too clean, but it expects the art, so it's waiting for the artworks. But the building is built, properly, luminously, and both the structure and the configuration of the roof show clearly the skill of this German architect. Another building, another museum from 1986 to 1989. This was really a difficult period, in my opinion, in architecture worldwide, because of the manifestations of postmodernism. here also he has interventions inside the building. It's an existing building. He didn't modify the exterior. He just has, sorry about the resolution of this of that picture, but this one as well. Nothing dramatic here, nothing you know, to take your breath away. You know, he's not a very adventurous architect. But again, I like to mention again, I think his early works, because of that use of brick, and also the way he treated the glass and metal work on the facades, deserve some recognition and even study. Another museum, this one I think is not too bad. You know, it's a functionalist work. We see the skylights at the top. You know, it's probably honestly built and honestly functioning. What can we say? We had seen buildings, you know, plenty of museums that are interesting, but this is more than interesting. I think it's probably functioning very well, and also aesthetically, I think is you know, moderately engaging. Josef Paul Kleihues, Professor Josef Paul Kleihues. It's not very, you know, surprising, the building, and but it's a small museum which probably functions properly. It's built properly, and it probably has a very correct lighting of the spaces underneath. Please be kind and turn off the microphone. Thank you. Again, Josef Paul Kleihues, you see also that he was able to work with you know, opaque walls of large dimensions, like we see here. So he was not just you know, a skillful architect to employ you know, the rhythmicity of metal and glass properly, but also to work with large surfaces of you know, opaque walls. Geometry, I do not know German, unfortunately. So Josef Paul Kleihues, Geometry und Poesie. So geometry and poetry. And indeed, if you can marry geometry and poetry, you have a chance to you know, to do a good work. It's not easy to marry geometry and poesy. And for the Romanians here today, I want to tell you that there was a Romanian who wrote a very interesting book, a book that which was known also by Le Corbusier, The Geometry of Art and Life, by Matila Gica. So I suggest to you to find this book, because it's exactly about geometry and poetry. And it was written by a Romanian diplomat. And this book was known, I read, by Le Corbusier. So again, it was written by Matila Gica, and the title is The Geometry of Art and Life. Because if you take just the geometry of art, is one thing, but to also have the geometry of life is to add something, a complication perhaps, but an interesting complication. Another building in Hamburg, 1988, 1989. Here it is. I think he also operated here within an existing building, but I think he did a good renovation here. You know, he cleaned up the building, and at the same time, he kept the vigor of the structure and of the space, and also the vigor of the exterior you know, appearance of the building. There is a lot to learn actually from Josef Paul Kleihues about being correct, but also about being an aspirer towards freedom through poetry, through the poetry of building, through the poetry of building in a humane way. I like that thing then, how this probably existed from the old building, or but you know, it's an amusing little ornamentation, so to speak, at the top of the building. So this is a museum, you know, Internationale Kunst, international art. Josef Paul Kleihues. And people stay in line before the pandemic, you know, to enter the Internationale Kunst you know, gallery or museum in Hamburg. It's a good old building. He didn't create the building, but he, you know, made his interventions properly within the existing building. He kept the building, you know, with the integrity that it had, and I think he did the right thing. It's a good building. I don't know who built it though, but it's a good building. Okay, another building in Hamburg, another museum, or is it? I don't know. Maybe it's not in Hamburg. I see the Hamburger, but that's not Hamburg. It's something in Berlin. Hamburger Bahnhof, a museum für Gegenwart. It's another museum. I like the structure here very much. I don't think he made this structure, or I don't know. Maybe he did. Maybe it existed. It's again a building that I think existed. Yeah, and it's a fine open space for art, and you can see people enjoy it. It's the space of democracy. It's the space of artistic experiments. Is the place where people who are in love hold hands, and that's something, you know. If we can make buildings where people, lovers, hold hands, I think it's a good chance we made some good buildings. But if we make buildings where lovers don't want to be hand in hand, I guess this could say something that our building is not very, very inspiring. Yeah, maybe let's attempt a superficial or ad hoc definition of architecture. Let's say architecture is the art of making a building in such a way that couples hold hands inside and in the proximity of those buildings. What about such a definition? I wonder what Le Corbusier would have thought of this possible definition of architecture. Is the art through which we make buildings where people hold hands, especially lovers. In other words, buildings which advocate the cause of love. Buildings which encourage emotions, feelings, sentiments, affection, love. Anyway, I'm beginning to perhaps dream a little bit, but I think it's important to dream, and I think it's important to you know, look at architecture also from a metaphysical point of view, and not only materialistically. Anyway, I like this building very much. I mean, I wouldn't mind at all having the space at my disposal to do some kind of art exhibition here. I like the fact that it is has some Gothic feeling about it because of the structure. Yeah. Now, I think he did, I mean, even if he didn't create a lot here, but he managed to, you know, respect and restore the old building properly. So this also shows a lot of care and inspiration and skill as an architect. He didn't, you know, it's very easy for an architect to destroy even a good building if the architect is not very skillful or attentive or affectionate. Now, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago, which I saw, 1991, 1996, I don't really like it. I have to confess, in my opinion, is it's morose. You know, look at it. It's yes, it's the city of Miss van der Rohe. He's you know, countryman, because as you know, Miss van der Rohe moved from Germany to the United States, and he moved to Chicago, and he built many buildings in Chicago, some famous and even inspired. But this building by Josef Paul Kleihues, it's unnecessarily rigid, and it's not, I don't know, I don't find it very graceful, you know, with these heavy walls above, you know, some, you know, the lower part of the building, which has some glass, and but it's, now, if you compare with his early works, I'm afraid this work is not as graceful. But there are interesting things inside, like this staircase, which I do like. And I even wonder exactly how it's going on here, but it's an interesting picture, nevertheless. And I see there are all kinds of interesting pictures taken of this stair inside. What can we say? The plan is perfectly symmetrical. As you can see, the sections are as they are. I still find it stiff. I think he was too much of a professor here. You know, he forgot a little bit to be a poet here. I think he forgot to be a little bit iconoclastic, and I think this is a problem. Well, fortunately, yes, there are these big 3 letters here, MCA, on both sides, which adds some drama to the building in the evening. Obviously, the, you know, the management of the building had a need to do something with these walls. Imagine the building without these 3 letters on both sides there, luminous as they are. They would have been oppressive and heavy, and we had seen them without the letters, and indeed rather oppressive. Like here, even if the building does have some, you know, the poetry of rigor, if I am to express myself in this way, but it's still a little bit morose for my taste. You know, it is, you know, it's, but fortunately we have art, and this is exactly what art is made for, to break the rules, to bring a smile on the face of the passerby, to make 2 lovers hold hands, something. That's why we need art. And if the building is also artistically conceived, all for the better. But you know, imagine if you remove the art here and here and here, and maybe with this perhaps useless big sphere here, what do you get? You get a building which is, I don't know, the otherness of art. Of course, we could envision art as being misanthropic. In other words, to turn your back on society, on the city, and so on. There are such architectural gestures in the field of art galleries or museums. But you see that the users and the management of the building needed to open up somehow the building somewhere. So, you know, they put up these words, "We are here," or, you know, these balloons or these large spheres here, and the 3 letters on both sides. But still, I see more life here, not the architectural life, but the life of the people in front of the building. There is more freedom and life and movement here than with the building. But inside the building, we see, because again, if the building is just a background against which art manifests itself, then the need for that rebellious art is for all to see. And that's what we see here. You know, it's not an accident that the art inside the building is so baroque, actually. And convoluted. It is convoluted because the building is not convoluted. So we all have dualities, right? When the restriction is too severe and the building seems to be restrictive, then you need to explode through something, and you explode through art. That's what art does. It explodes. Art is a gesture towards freedom. Anyway, the region Berlin, 1993, 1996. So the previous building that we saw is the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago, Illinois, the United States. This is an apartment building in Berlin. When was it built? 1993, 1996. So about a quarter of a century ago. It's okay, it's okay. I mean, Berlin has many such buildings, older and newer. It's not too rigid. It could have been more rigid. He played a little bit like here, even in the corner with these, let's call them balconies, although they are very narrow. It's okay, Is it a wow building? No, it's not. And he didn't intend to be, and he's not a wow architect. But again, for me, subjectively, his early work is better. When he worked with red bricks and with a kind of a modernism, not too dogmatic. What is this? Something for the TV, 1994, 1996, Deutsche Welle, no pictures, and an aula in Kösfeld, 1995, 1996. I hope I have pictures here. No, sorry. And Haus Sommer und Haus Liebermann in Berlin, Pariser Platz, 1995, 1999. I hope I have at least here a picture, and I do. It's this building here, and he built another one on the other side, both sides of the Brandenburg Gate. A difficult context, of course, because, this is a heavily charged place in Berlin, historically, politically, socially. So, this is what it was during the war or after the war. It was the disaster of the Second World War, and he was commissioned to build on both sides of the Brandenburg Gate, and he did. But please keep this picture in mind, and please, for the rest of your life, fight against war. We should all fight against war. It is unacceptable that after the destructions that took place in the Second World War, Putin attacks now Ukraine and creates similar images, similar tragedies. Forget the images. This is not about images. This is about death. And it is happening at this very moment, not far away from where we are. And this is difficult to comprehend, and certainly difficult, not difficult, it is unacceptable. Unacceptable. I cannot understand how Russia, which lost millions of people in the Second World War, provokes now another war where already tens of thousands of people died and millions displaced. How do you explain it? How could you explain the fact that humans do not learn? To me, it is unexplainable. We go to museums, we go to churches. Mr. Putin claims he is a believer, a churchman. He is in good relationship with the Patriarch of Moscow, Kirill, and yet he has no problem to start a war, a deadly war, which continues to this very moment, forgetting completely the tragedy of the Second World War. I do not understand. I cannot understand. So this is the building by Josef Paul Kleihues, and he built another one on the other side. I guess this one might be by him too. It's, again, a difficult context. This was not a place to invite, Frank Gehry to build some of his extravagant structures. Although, you know, in a more extravagant state of mind, maybe that could be like a mental exercise possibility too. Anyway, Kleihues, who was one of the rebuilders of Berlin, he was commissioned to build these buildings, and he left them, without too much emotions. In fact, the reticence of the buildings do send a message. You know, it's sometimes it is perhaps appropriate to lower your head and say nothing, although protesting against the war is important. But in this case, the war already took place, and in what way can you build in such a place? Perhaps, you know, a certain level of being mute is all you can aspire towards or contemplate. I like the details, though, of the building. You know, it's like in the reticence of the building, he's actually showing the skill of his architecture. It's nothing, there are no overstatements here. You know, it's everything is reticently, but qualitatively, well done. And I think in this sense, he understood well the context of, you see here, both buildings, this one and the other one here, which were built in Berlin in this very sensitive urban context and place. Josef Paul Kleihues, Professor Josef Paul Kleihues. The inside, though, shows even levels of a certain sensuality, like the staircase, which is very well done, and also the materials he used, you know, welcoming even the so-called disorder of the ornaments of stone, of nature. Is this marble? It's very possible. So, you know, just like Miss van der Rohe in the Barcelona pavilion, he didn't say no to ornament, although it's clear we are dealing here with a very, you know, reticent architect. This is the rendering of what he did, the model, and yeah, a very sensitive place in Berlin. Sorry about this, it's a little bit light, the drawing, but you can see the two buildings built by Josef Paul Kleihues very clearly here. I would say this is more than just a correct architecture. Yes, it is a correct architecture, but the sensitivity with which he chose to remain reticent is to be noticed, because in itself has a certain level of poetry, I would say. Now, what is this? Another building in Berlin is this one. I like the fact that he employs vertical windows as opposed to the obsessive horizontal ones of dogmatic modernism. These narrow vertical windows and openings on the first floor, I think, add something a little bit different to an otherwise, common scheme, so to speak. I don't know if he did the landscaping in the courtyard as well. It's rather restrictive, but in a Cartesian kind of way, artistic too. Yeah, the courtyard of the building coast facade we had seen. But it does hurt me a little bit to see nature, tamed in this rather rigid way. Do we see here geometry and poetry? I don't know. I think I see more geometry than poetry. But with an exercise of imagination, maybe there is a slight poetry here too, very slight. I personally, temperamentally, I'm a little bit against this kind of segmentation of nature and incarcerating grass and plants and thus nature in little rectangles and so on. The army of grass, it doesn't sound good and it doesn't look good for my taste. And the elevations of the building are depressing in the grayness, in my opinion. Another work in Potsdam, 1998, 1999. This is an interior design in an existing building, I think, for something for the army, as it is obvious. I don't know. I mean, art and the army, although sometimes interesting works are done for the army, like the chapel that SOM built for the American, airspace, army, and also beautiful small synagogue built by Tzvi Hecker in Israel for the Israeli army. But here, even the display is so militaristically irregular, and I don't know, it's not my taste. But finally I can breathe. The beauty of these, elements of nature, they soften the image of what we saw there inside. It's as if nature is telling us, please, you human beings, behave, be kind to each other, be gentle, stop the war, stop, take off the uniforms, take a breath and hold hands. This is the beauty of nature, and this is what art is supposed to do too. But what can we do? I guess we cannot live without armies. We cannot live without military equipments, and tragically, we cannot live without wars. So I look at a building which was existent. I look at a tree, I look at another tree, and I look at this piece of water with these randomly floating plants. And I love what I see here. The building is too rigid and too almost pompous and too authoritative, too authoritarian in its symmetry and rigidity and what is inside. It's a palace, it's an old building. He didn't build it, but I'm sure he could not have, become Dada inside, like iconoclastically other or saying no. He couldn't do that. I understand, but in a strange way, the building is not so rigid towards outside. I mean, it has a certain softness, it's touches of, small touches of kindness. Museum of whatever that is, art, of course, 1998, 2000s, again, Kunst. I don't know. I mean, yes, it could be this way, or it could have been another way. I look at the old building, and he built this one in contrast with the old building. I guess it's to an extent okay, but it's so blunt. This, I don't know, like we saw in the museum in Chicago, he exactly there where he would have the chance to assert or underline or even amplify the feeling of freedom that art generates, he becomes a little bit misanthropic and morose, I think, and a little bit stiff. The inside, I don't know what to say about it, I mean, I would question the blueness of the floor, and yes, I would invite some graffiti artists, maybe drunk, to splash some colors on those white walls and even on the windows. That's what I would do if I was in charge of this museum. Here, yes, of course, you can contemplate the artworks, you know, well distanced from each other, and the space is luminous, and all the rest. The beast, which art is tamed. Yes, again, the beast which art is tamed, is domesticated. You know, the artist might have been wild, the artist might have been Dionysian, but here on this world, it's is calmed down, is contained, is framed. So the beast is much less dangerous, if at all. The building towards the outside, again, an existing building. He didn't build it, but yeah, I don't. Anyway, what is this? And I can read German, and I should learn German, but I know I never will. No pictures, and it's possible we approach the end of this other short presentation on Josef Paul Kleihues without another picture. I would be disappointed, but it might be that this is possible. But you know what's interesting? I mentioned the word Dionysus, and here I have it, you know, and I didn't know, I didn't look at this presentation in 2 years or so, because that's when I made it, the Dionysianum in the rain. Here it is. Well, I don't know exactly why that Dionysian derivation, linguistic derivation was there. The building, what can we say? You know, it's a correct building, but I prefer the one on the left, a church, an old church. This one is, I don't know. I find even this lower inferior part of the building rather pretentious, with this, you know, different ornamental pieces connected like this. You know, I think he could have done better. The interior is okay, functionalist. I wouldn't call it really poetic or rationalist. It's a gymnasium, actually. It's a high school. And fortunately, there are students who, I hope they are more free than the building. And they seem to be, you know, enjoying looking through the glass, although those there are no opening windows. Anyway, it's a high school. That's what it is, a gymnasium. And here is the plan. I guess what he did is in red, Josef Paul Kleihues. Professor Josef Paul Kleihues. Okay, another gymnasium with running kids. The building is not running, but the kids are running, and that's good. Very narrow, tall space here, maybe interesting. But what is truly interesting is the life of the children, you know, of the pupils. You know, they are the ones who are alive. The building is not so much alive, but they are, and they matter. And what else can we say? A classroom like many other classrooms that we had seen, where the students are tortured in the name of knowledge. Yeah. Another building by Professor Kleihues. I hope another kind of architect will be celebrated tomorrow, because he is not one of my favorite architects. He's not. An arcade, I guess, in Münster. That's it. No more pictures. Happy birthday, Professor Josef Paul Kleihues.